Morning. Oh, I love that video, the children discussing what an ACECQA looks like, all those arms and all those legs. And I was thinking that the arms are sort of like the trends that are redefining your sector. And those legs, ginormous legs, are like the changes sweeping through society. And they are everywhere. And we would, of course, do well to understand these trends, even beyond that, to observe the shifts, to respond to the changes, and to really be prepared for the future that these trends, these changes are creating in your sector and in our society. And I think when you look at the change around you in society, in communities, in your centres, you're probably amazed at the speed of the change, the scale of the trends, the impacts of the changes that we see in our society today. And these are rare times in which we live. It's only occasionally in history that you get massive demographic change colliding with rapid technological shifts and huge social trends, so much so that within the span of a decade, society altogether alters. And we are living in the midst of one such transformation right now. And it's having a transformative effect on families as well. I mean, we know we're living in changed times, of course, because we have new technologies in our pockets and in our bags, but we also have new words in our lexicon. We talk apps now. We didn't use that term just 5 or 6 years ago. The first iPhone came to Australia in 2008. Already it's just they're about to launch their 4th generation of iPhones in just on half a decade. Massive transformation in how we communicate and interact in this world around us. And not just apps, but tweets. We use that term and we use that platform perhaps as a way of finding out what others are saying and interacting even at conferences like this and getting a news feed even through the social media sites of today. The Twitterverse, another term that's emerged there, status updates. Just think about your use of these apps and social media platforms. Just think for a moment, how many have you used on a smartphone or tablet today any social media platforms? Have you texted someone or been on a social media feed, maybe looked into a blog or checked a status update? If you have used a social media or communications platform on your smart device today already, quick show of hands so we can see. Look at that, almost every one of us in the room. That is phenomenal. And that is rapid change because half a decade we didn't even have the tools, let alone the platforms, let alone the new terms. Clouds used to be things in the sky. Now they're things where we store our data as we connect in this wireless world. Tablets used to be things that we took as medicine to maintain our health, and now they're things we interact with. And it is impacting the children in your centres even more than the rest of us because of the age at which they, this most materially and technologically supplied generation in history, are exposed to these new technologies. This generation that is skipping computers and beginning with the touchscreen, intuitive and tablet-based computers without keyboards in this world today. So I want to look at 5 trends that are transforming these children and families and defining these families of the future. And the first would have to be demographic trends. What comprises families of today? What proportion do they make up of our nation? And what are the trends in this regard? Well, we're in a fast-growing world demographically. It was last year that our world hit the 7 billion mark, and it was earlier this year that our nation hit the 23 million mark. So there we are, a big population in an even bigger world. We probably marvel at the growth of our world, the population growth, but you may not realise that Australia has been tracking the same growth trend as our world. In fact, in the year 1966, not only was the world half its current population of 3.5 billion, but Australia was half what it currently is at 11.5 million. So we have doubled our population, along with the doubling of the global population in the same span of time. And in fact, Australia's population growth rate is now 1.8% faster than the global growth rate of 1.1%. So we're growing faster than average. And much of that growth is coming about through natural increase, through the record births that we're experiencing right now, and which is creating unprecedented demand for the services that you provide. Let's think about Australia's growth compared to comparable nations for a moment. Germany, in the last century, has increased its population by just a quarter, at 80 million people currently, but a modest increase compared to ours. Take the UK, they have gone from 45 million people in 1913 to 63 million people today, an increase of about a third. Sweden in 1913 had a population larger than ours. They were at 5.5 million. We were at 4.7 million. And in the century since, they've gone from 5.5 million to 9.5 million. Well, we've gone from 4.7 million people to 23 million people, which puts all of these other nations in the shade. There's another gold medal for us right there. Pretty impressive population growth. And you're at the crossroads of that, because you're dealing with this record birth rate that we're currently seeing. 40% of our population growth at the moment is coming through natural increase. People are living longer, so the death rate has been declining. The standardized death rate for the last couple of decades has been going down and down. The individualized death rate is still 100%. Just better point that out. That's just a reality. Not even demographers can do anything about that. But the standardized death rate is declining. That is, we're living longer than ever before. This aging of the population that it's creating, of course, is a good news story. And it means you're connecting with more of the generations. The family that you connect with now is not just the parents, but increasingly the grandparents. More generations involved in the caring of the youngsters today. But the rapid population increase, just from a natural increase perspective, is certainly being fed through record births at the moment. We've got 5.1 million children in this nation. More than 3.5 million households with dependent children, and record births, 300,000 births per year. We've just broken that 300,000 mark in a year for the first time in our history. Keep in mind that our largest generation are called the baby boomers, and they were part of this post-World War II baby boom that began in 1946 and continued to grow in numbers till about 1961, when the births started to ease off at that point. But they hit a peak in the early 1960s at 240,000 births, and now are exceeding 300,000 births every year. There is a bigger baby boom now than that original baby boom that created our largest generation. And not only are there more children than ever before in our nation, but the majority of families with dependent children are two-income earning families. So mums and dads out there working, if not full-time, certainly part-time. So the demand on what you're providing is growing as well. Now, these changes to the family dynamics and to household numbers are quite remarkable. For a century, the average household size had been declining. In 1913, we were at, in fact, get the exact year, it was 1911, we had 4.5 people per household. And we'd just been declining in household size, and in 2006, we got down to 2.5 people per household. But in the last couple of years, something remarkable has happened. For the first time in a century, the household size has turned around and has started to increase. It's gone from 2.5 to 2.6 people, a modest increase, but it's a turnaround in a century-long trend of declining household sizes. We're getting bigger as households once again, partly because we've got the kids staying at home longer. Partly you've got boomerang kids, the ones that leave home and the parents think they're off the hook, and suddenly the kids boomerang on back. Sometimes, excitingly, they've got their own children in tow when they return back. And so we've got these multi-generational households that we hadn't seen for a century. And we've got a sandwich generation, a baby boomers sandwiched between the kids that won't leave home and their own parents needing a little bit of care as they age. We've got different family structures compared to what we saw today, as well as a slight increase in the total fertility rate as well. So household sizes are changing and structures are changing. Next year marks another milestone for our country, and that is that for the first time, the couple-only household will pip the traditional nuclear family as the number one most common household. This is coming about because of changed social trends as well. Couples are delaying starting their own family and having children, not in their early 20s, but their early 30s today. So couple only at the start of life before the children come along. And then at the end in the older age groups, you've got the empty nesters. The kids finally leave home and remaining as a couple only household for a longer period of time as an empty nester in that big family home. So couple-only households are emerging and growing, as well as the traditional nuclear families and the multi-generational households and the single-parent households comprising about 10% of all households nationally. You've got the solo-person household, about 1 in 4 households, and then group living, and dynamic and changing household forms redefining the makeup of our nation and families as well. But we're also more culturally diverse than we've ever been. 1 in 4 of us wasn't born here. But just to get a perspective on the family influence, because even if someone was Australian born but they have parents born overseas, that's going to change and influence their cultural identity and connection. And so if you include those households with one or both parents born overseas, we're at 46% of our entire population. So connecting not just with the age diversity, with the family diversity, with the growth in the numbers of young people, but with this cultural diversity is also key to connect with families of the future. We've always been culturally diverse. About 1 in 4 of us, whichever era you look at, was born overseas. But the nations from which people have come and now call Australia home continues to grow. We still have the UK and New Zealand at number 1 and 2 on the list there. But China and India and Vietnam and the Philippines, all there in the top 7 source countries. And so the spread, the growth, the diversity of our cultures continues to grow as well. Another big change in our dynamic, in our structure, in our demography and in the families is the aging of the population that I just touched on. If we go back 4 decades, this was our population profile called the population pyramid because it was a clear pyramid shape. We had more younger people, and as you move up through those age groups, fewer older people, giving that clear pyramid shape. Let's wind the clock forward 4 decades to today, and that's how we look. So starting to lose that pyramid shape. More middle and older Australians relative to our population than ever before. Let's wind the clock forward 4 more decades to the middle of the century, and that's how we will look. In fact, in this year, there will be more people aged over 65 than aged under 18, and inverting of this population pyramid and creating challenges, creating new clients that you're connecting with, as I said, across the generations, creating some funding challenges as money goes where the growth in the population is in the older years, but at the same time, record births. And you'll notice, and I'll just show you briefly, if you look at each age group, it's not as though there are fewer young people in a time of aging. Every age group grows. It's just that with the longevity data, we're aging significantly, and the older population's growing even more significantly as a percentage of population than the younger demographics. So where's it all headed? By the middle of this century, our population, based on current trajectories, will be at about 40 million people. The median age will have continued to increase. In the early 1980s, we had an average national age of 29. Now we're just approaching 38, and we'll be on our way to 43 by the middle of the century, and a tripling in number of the over 65s. So that's part of the aging and part of the challenge and part of our communities in which you're connecting today. I think it's important to look at demographic analytics, but also we can learn a lot about Australia by looking at Google Analytics. And I've got here the most asked questions by Australians on Google in the last 12 months. This gives a little insight into the psyche of our nation, into the questions that keep us up late at night, into the existential search of what's on the heart of Australians. And the most asked question on Google in the last 12 months was this question: what is Gangnam Style? Now, maybe some of you in the room have asked that question, Googled it, and added to the data. I'm not kidding you, that was the most asked question. And the most asked why is question, I just did the what is, the why is, the where is, the who is. The most asked why is question, why is my internet so slow? And I think these two might be related. So many people watching these banal YouTube videos that it's slowing down the bandwidth for everyone else. Nonetheless, these are the questions that we were asking. I just came through Singapore last month, and if you've been to Singapore, you know that they like their rules there, no chewing gum and no spitting. And I found a new sign as I passed through. Fair enough too. There's far too much of that Gangnam Style dancing, so let's bring it to an end. The third most question here, the most asked when is question, when is Father's Day? Now this is a reality check for all of us dads. I looked up the data in a bit more detail, and the searching for this of this question peaked on Sunday the 16th of June 2013, which was the US Father's Day. But so many people, I think, saw a news item or saw something on social media, Father's Day, hang on, did I miss Father's Day again? And just better Google it to make sure, it's in September in Australia, okay, it's June for the US. But it caused a few startled mornings nonetheless, the global nature of things. The most asked, where is question? Where is Chuck Norris? And I'm not kidding you. It's not as though you missed some major news event and the guy's gone missing. It's just that this taps into this action hero meme. If you type in where is Chuck Norris into Google and click on that I'm feeling lucky button, it takes you to a page and it simply says, you don't need to ask where is Chuck Norris because Chuck Norris will always find you. And as you'd expect from that macho action hero, but nonetheless people are Googling it because of the Google humor that they have built in there. And the most asked, who is question? Who is Gossip Girl? For those that have watched the read the books or watched the TV series, a lot of searching going on. There are deep issues that keep us up late at night, as you can see. We're a very reflective, soul-searching nation, aren't we? Clearly. Which brings me to the second of these trends that are transforming families and children today, the technological trends. And just some of the numbers, I think, highlight this social media world that has transformed our society in a decade. But for the younger generation coming through today, it's the only world they have ever known. 4.7 billion Google searches per day, but a close number two, 4 billion YouTube views per day. We've now got a whole generation growing up Googling in YouTube. The platform, the search engine for them is YouTube, the number two search engine on the planet, because they want to watch a video about something, not read an article on something. A very video-based generation, getting their information in new ways. And we've got to keep that in mind when we communicate now with Generation Y parents and indeed Generation Z young people, that they are very visual in how they take in information and process it. All these billion Facebook accounts, 500 million tweets a day, many hundreds of thousands, 1.4 million in fact, apps around. And I've put up here as the title, From Digital Transactors to Digital Integrators, because while we all use these social media platforms, the age at which you're exposed to the technology determines how embedded it becomes in your lifestyle. And so these younger generations are being shaped in an era where they truly integrate seamlessly these new technologies into their lifestyles, whereas the rest of us can use them, but we use them structurally and functionally and in a more transactional tool-based way. For the under 25s, the smartphone has now become the primary device for navigation and photography and news headlines and getting the weather and as a clock or an alarm as well. 61% of Gen Ys have used a smartphone in a store to go online shopping. Blurring of the categories. Used to be online was here and offline was there, but now this showrooming concept where they'll go online in a store to check prices or consumer blogs or find out what people are saying about brands, it's phenomenal. And so I think technology and its impact on family in the next generation is not so much the technologies that we're using, but how the use of the technologies transforms mindsets and attitudes and expectations. We've moved from a structural one to a post-structural world where we shift the timing. We time shift when we watch TV programs because of the technology. We time shift when we work. We can telework. We can work out of those set offices. We can work in different times. We can change where we work, how we work, and with whom we work through technology. And of course, schools are changing as well, from being 9 to 3 to the flipping of learning where education can take place outside of that. And I think with families of the future, you're going to start to see some time-shifting expectations as to when the children can be looked after, because the timing of the workplace is changing. People starting earlier, finishing later, perhaps people working increasingly from home and yet at home but still need the children minded because they're working while they're at home. The federal government has a target of having 20% of public servants teleworking by 2020. That's a fifth of the workforce working from home, and the public sector even further ahead. And so how we work has changed, the timing of that work. The categories in which we operate, how we take in information, how students look has indeed been transformed as well. We're seeing pedagogy change to indeed deliver some customization of the learning for the individual learning needs of the students, rather than the one-size-fits-all of the past. The diversity in the classroom is there culturally, it's there sometimes even from an age perspective, it's certainly there from a functional approach to the use of technology and a learning styles perspective as well. We're post-linear. It used to be you went to school, you went through education, you came out as educated. But that has been transformed and the pathways are multiple, and it's true even before the formal schooling years begin. In a sense, I've said that the young people coming in to begin their education are post-schooled even before schooling has begun. They're not ready to sit and listen in that traditional classroom structure. They're not ready to absorb through that auditory, literate form of learning, that structural approach to delivery. In fact, the early experience that you provide creates learning styles across or outside of that traditional structural and linear and auditory-based learning formats. And so by the time they move into school, they're post-schooled in that traditional sense. They're ready to learn in new ways. And the pathways from school are far more diverse and fragmented than ever before. Classrooms used to look like this. Now, of course, they look a little bit more like this. A bit more interactive, a bit more empowered. Students taking charge of their learning journey a little bit more. The kids sitting on the beanbags. Even some workplaces have adults sitting on the beanbags. So it doesn't change so much as we move through the schooling system, perhaps. The speed of the change is phenomenal. It's changing how these children, these Generation Zs that you're educating, will work. Firstly, if you look at the median tenure of employment today, the average Australian stays 3 years and 4 months per job. That's the median. Right? So if your team is average, half of your team has been there for more than 3 years and 4 months, half has been there for less than that period of time. Now, if 3 years and 4 months plays out in the lifetime, or over the lifetime of a school leaver today, and based on retirement trends, they will have 17 separate employers in their lifetime across multiple careers. They'll move in and out of learning throughout their life. And this foundational education that you provide is critical because it will build those learning skills and tools for a lifetime of education and for a lifetime of career change and transition. Of course, some of these 17 jobs in which school leavers of today will work don't even exist today, just as school leavers now are working in jobs that didn't exist a few years ago, like social media managers or sustainability officers, or massive growth in the retirement age groups as we saw, and teleworking coordinators. Medical nanotechnology has taken off phenomenally. Digital history analysts, cyber security professionals, keeping across these trends and how the technology is transforming pathways and mindsets and learning styles and communication engagement strategies to connect with parents today is, of course, critical. The speed of the change is phenomenal, and it's changed even how the learning takes place. In our classrooms, when we were young, we grew up with the ABCs looking a little bit more like this: A for apple, and B for bumblebee, and C for car. Now the ABCs for this digital generation look a little bit more like this, just looking at some of the media and technological platforms on which they consume content. Let's just test you on some of these Generation Z platforms for a moment in this digital world. The ABCs of the 21st century. A is for Amazon, very good. And B is for Blogger. Bing is it? Yeah, very good. C is for Canon, good. D for Dig, a little sharing social media platform there. E for, very good. And F is for, and G is for, all right, pretty good. So 90% there. 90% digital, 10% analog, but that's okay. We're bridging the generations, which is important. And the third trend is the generational transitions. The families of today are in the new generations. Your centres now are increasingly being led and managed by Generation X. And Generation X are the parents of today. And Generation Y are the new staff members coming in. And Generation Z are the children coming into your centres. And indeed, after that, Generation Alpha as well. And so understanding the transitions of the generations is critical as well. The oldest generation we have are the builders' generation, and an apt label for them because they have built our education systems, our society, our businesses, our infrastructure, and continued to build and make a contribution to this day. Based on their age, they've largely exited from the full-time workforce, and yet they're still making and building and creating this society. The baby boomers are next, and a very dominant generation in the workforce currently, more than a third of the workforce. But you can see, based on the age there, by the end of this decade, they'll be about half the percentage share of the full-time workforce as they currently are. And so the baton being passed from one generation to the next. Generation X, as I said, are coming into the leadership roles in your centres, coming into the parenting roles, and of course making decisions over the children. And they, from a workforce perspective, are going to remain fairly constant over the decade ahead. But where there is big change is Generation Y. And they're now moving into the peak age of having children. 30.7 years of age in Australia. So they're right now becoming the new parents. They're right now moving to the workforce in record numbers. And currently 1 in 5 workers will be more than a third of the workforce by the end of this decade. And they work in different ways. They have different expectations. They're the most formally educated generation in history. This is straight from the census data. And it shows that if we look at our total population for the first time in our history, more than half of the population have a post-secondary qualification. But if we just look at Generation Y, the 25 to 34-year-olds, we've got more than a third of them with a degree. And with the generation coming after, it'll be even higher, probably getting close to about half. So big changes in educational expectations and rates, changes in how they want to be led, from a hierarchical approach, from a top-down authoritarian approach to leadership of the past, this command and control model, to now, when you think about the new staff coming in, they want a little bit more of the collaboration, the empowerment model. They want a bit of a say and give some direction and share some input. They're a bit more entrepreneurial. They want to share their ideas and not just sit within a hierarchical chain of command. So how we lead has to change as well. You've got in your handouts, I think in your packs, some of these demographic maps where we look at the generations and where I've put down a lot of this data on the demographics of Australia today, the generational change and how we can better connect with the emerging generation. But I guess the point is that we have to lead in new ways. If we just apply the autocratic approach to engaging with the new staff members coming into your centres, it's not going to get the great results. This might have worked in the past. Firings will continue until morale improves. Probably not going to work that well today. In fact, I read a great book on leadership by John Maxwell, an American writer. He had a good quote for the leaders of today, leading the next generation. He says, look, if you're leading and no one's following, then you're just out for a walk. And ever have that experience? You're leading and no one's following? It's only true that we're leading if people are following. And to follow now, we've got to, bring them with us. We've got to communicate. We've got to bring them along with us, not just expect them to rely on the badge or the rank or the authority. But we have to guide them, otherwise we won't get some great outcomes. We don't want a whole generation that ends up, hey, that's not my job. It's my job to paint the line down the road. It's not my job to stop and remove fallen tree branches. So we've got to get a balance between this of leading effectively and engaging ways, but at the same time offering direction. The National Quality Framework, of course, shows that you're in a sector where there is growing compliance requirements, where there's growing requirements to ensure that all the I's are dotted and the quality is delivered. The compliance and the regulation continues to grow in your sector. And yet the generation coming in are less compliant and more prone to push back and to question, to find a workaround. So we've got to lead by guiding them and ensuring that they can work well with the frameworks and the requirements of today, but at the same time empowering them on the journey. Generation Z come next, they're the children, but they also, by the end of this decade, will make up about 1 in 6 of your workers. And what comes after Generation Z, as I alluded, and it's on those handouts as well, it's Generation Alpha. I think that we've got to be able to communicate effectively with these new generations, and they do speak a different dialect of English. So I want to give you just a quick exercise now, just a chance to interact with the person beside you to see whether you can speak Generation Z, this dialect of English, this language, this slang language. So I've got just a few words that they speak, particularly the teenagers of today, and see whether you can decipher these words. They shorten words, and they'll say things like, don't diss me, or that's really cron. They might say soz or cray-cray. Is this some seafood dish? What on earth is this? Who are the rents? What is LOL? And for shizzle, what are they talking about? I'm going to give you half a minute to decipher as many of those words as you can. All right, let me interrupt you. And let's see how you went speaking Gen Z. We'll test some of your answers and see how we're going, bridging that generation gap. So firstly, we've got this word diss, which is short for Disrespect. Don't diss me, they'll say. Don't disrespect. Very good. And chron is short for chronic. Good. Now it sounds nasty, but if something is chronic, is it bad or is it good? It's good. It's fully sick. It's wicked or it's warped or it's the bomb, right? If it sounds bad, it's good. I wrote a book on this recently, the generational language of today, and I wrote a chapter about the contrarianness. So the reverse is also true. So if you do overhear a Gen Z describing you as a real hero or a winner, it's not good. Okay? Everything's been reversed, so I just thought I'd paint the reality there for you. Soz means sorry, and cray-cray is crazy. Very good. And who are the rents? Parents. Of course the parents are rents. And LOL is good. Not lots of love. Some people are still causing problems. You know, a youngster's having a tough time in his exams and you send a message to your nephew, you know, thinking about you at this time, you know, LOL. Laugh out loud at me amidst my failure. So we've got to get the language right. And for shizzle is for sure, absolutely. So there's a creativity with the language. And some good fun to be had with the language of today. While it's good that you understand the language, don't feel the need to speak the language. Doesn't sound good when people over about 25 start talking about things being really cron or fully sick. But it does bring me to the fourth of these 5 trends, the social trends. What's happening in families in terms of where they're living and how they're living and the future of the social trends of families today and tomorrow. As I said, the family life stages have been pushed back. The markers of adulthood have been pushed back. Marriage, mortgage, children, career. It's an early 30-something thing, not early 20s anymore. Same with having children. It's early 30s, not early 20s. So increasingly the parents you're dealing with are a little bit older than those that we dealt with a generation ago, and more empowered, two-income earning and more diverse in terms of the approaches that they take, the programs that they're running, the busyness of their schedules. It's not that 9-to-5 set structured approach anymore. We've got 23 million people and about 11.5 million people in the workforce working in Australia. And the big shift has been this growth in the part-time workforce. A generation ago, about 1 in 10 workers was part-time. Now 3 in 10 part-time. So juggling the multiple roles is the new challenge in families today. About 1 in 20 people unemployed. That's our 5% unemployment rate. But about 1 in 20 people underemployed and want more work for financial reasons but can't get it. So some hidden unemployment in the mix. And it brings us back to the financial challenge that families out there are facing. Even though they've had an extra decade of work before they start the families, even though they're 2 incomes, not just one, the finances, the challenge of the household budgets is a key one as you experience with those parents firsthand. The life stages have changed. It's not just childhood, teenagerhood, adulthood anymore, but far more transition points in life. The children are older, younger, and so there's the tweens. This is the phase you look at a little bit, the so-called in-between years. The 8 to 12-year-olds are sort of like yesterday's teenagers by way of their access to information, the brand awareness they have, the access to the technologies. They're older, younger. Some people say the tweens are the 8 to 12. Some people say, no, they're the 7 to 11s or they're the 6 to 10s. Such is the transformation there. And then you've got the teenage years. But by the time you move from 19 to 20, you don't move into adulthood. You're in the young adult years, staying in education later, delaying career, staying at home longer. By the time the mid-20s turn to late 20s, though, we've sort of moved out of the young adult phase, although the KIPPERS term, I think, sums up that situation pretty well. It's an acronym. KIPPERS. It stands for Kids in Parents' Pockets Eroding Retirement Savings. So just keep in mind the KIPPERS reality out there. And some of you have some KIPPERS, and I think some of you are KIPPERS, but that's okay. It is expensive out there at the moment. In fact, more than a third of Australians are paying off their mortgage. If we look at Australians by household tenure, you've got a third, mainly the older Australians, that are lucky enough to have paid off their mortgage, and just under a third are renting. But this is a historical snapshot. This is all households in the country. If we look at what's happened in the last decade, and particularly Generation Y, as they start their families, they're more likely to be in that renting category than any other category. And not just renting at the start of life, as used to be the case, but some renting a lot later in life, and some renting throughout their life because of the housing affordability challenges, or because of where they want to be living in terms of some lifestyle, or just to keep some flexibility options growing. Now, the impact of how we live and the tenure of our homes directly impacts on our communities. And that is, if you look at the average renter in Australia, they stay 1.8 years per abode. Now, if you have a lifelong renter, that means they're going to move across 30 separate communities in their lifetime. That's a lot of churn and change. And it means you're going to get higher turnover of parents and families. They might stay a shorter period of time with the children in your care than used to be the case. More churn is increasingly the norm. Even those who have the kids and have the mortgage and are paying off that house don't stay 20, 30 years in that home like our parents did, where they bought a home at the start of their working life. They started a family in that home. They raised the kids in that home. They became empty nesters in that same home. That is rare these days. Very few people can afford the family home at the start of their family years. They buy what they can afford. Children come along, they have to upgrade more children, or the children move through other life stages. They have to change their housing again. And so 8 years per home, not 10, 15 or 20 years. Those who have paid off their home have stayed a lot longer. But the point is, there is more churn in our communities, even those that have mortgages, than we've ever seen before. And partly that's because of housing affordability challenges. If we look at our capital cities, it is getting increasingly hard for that next generation to pay off those homes. People say, look, wages have gone up over the recent decades. That's true, but house prices have gone up even faster. This is the average capital city house price in Australia compared to average earnings of the same period. So in 1973, average house price was 5 times average annual earnings. Go forward 2 decades to 1993, now house prices were 6 times average annual earnings. Wind the clock forward to today, and the average capital city house price is now 10 times the average annual earnings. So for this next generation, it is harder to get and to maintain that house. These are the financial challenges that we face. And if we look at the average after-tax disposable income per household, it's probably more modest than we might think. It's in Australia $44,000. Now this is after tax, so this is the take-home pay for the household, but out of that has to come everything that the family needs, from the accommodation to the food and the childcare and everything else. Now, the other factor that you'll notice here is that what's called the Gini coefficient, which is the measure of the spread of incomes across all households or families, has been getting worse. We used to be the land of the middle class, with most people in the middle structures. Now that's changed, and the spread between the upper and the lower incomes continues to grow. And so, if you look at the bottom 20% of households, they're at about $16,000 after tax for the household, and the top 20% of households, 1 in 5 households, are at more than $88,000 after tax. And so the differential between the bottom 1 in 5 and the top 1 in 5 is a 5-fold differential. And that's, of course, after the tax system has done its best to sort of level out the playing field. But you're having challenges in mortgage stress and energy bill stress and rent stress, not in just the bottom 1 in 5, but moving up into that second quintile of housing as well. So some financial challenges. And so families are moving, not just locally, but indeed further afield as well. These are the 5 categories in which the Australian Bureau of Statistics tracks where we all live in our households. 5 categories. And the little red blobs there is where 2 in 3 Australians live, in our major capital cities and major cities. But that's not the end of the story. We're not just urbanised in terms of our capital cities, but there has been solid growth in the blue areas there, which are the inner regional areas. People living in some of the western suburbs of our cities and the outer areas, they're saying, you know what, big commute time, big expenses here on the mortgage. Maybe we can head an hour or so over the Great Divide to another town and set up some lifestyle and get a bit of a breather on the mortgage. And so there's been big growth over recent years in the inner regional areas. In fact, in some of our states like WA and South Australia, the inner regional areas, those towns, are growing faster than the capital cities of Adelaide and Perth, and not far behind in some of the other states as well. So growth in the regional areas. We sometimes think that the regions must be in decline, everyone's moving to the cities. No, some of the outer regions, which are marked in green, aren't doing as well, but that's because people are moving to the larger regional centres. And on this population map that you all got, we have the top 30 capital city or top 30 cities in Australia, and they're not just capital cities, they're inner regional cities like Albury, Wodonga and Bendigo and Ballarat and Wagga Wagga and Toowoomba, and they're not all coastal. A lot of them are inland. So a bit of a snapshot there in terms of where we're living and the future. Now this is a reminder of the need to keep ahead of the trends, because trends come very quickly and sometimes disappear quickly these days. Do you remember in 2011 that phenomenon of planking? That was a weird thing. It sort of came from nowhere and went to nowhere. This measures the mentions of the word planking on Facebook, and you can see prior to May 2011 the term didn't exist. And then it took off and it went crazy, but it quickly died away. And I was trying to work out what was it in May 2011 that kicked off the whole planking phenomenon. I mean, where did the idea even come from? And I have a feeling it was an accident. It was something that happened. And people thought, that is really cool. I'm going to try that. And so they tried it out. And planking has gone global. It came to Australia and it continued its way around the world. I was trying to work out what was it in August of 2011 that brought the planking theme to a screeching halt. And I think it's when they started planking on those morning TV programs. And people thought, oh, please, that is so mainstream. Can no one plank anymore? It's getting embarrassing. And no one has planked ever since. I mean, after that, people thought, I'm not going to plank. So, you don't want to be the last person out there planking. It's embarrassing. But it's a reminder for us to observe the difference between fads and trends. There are lots of fads that come and go. We've got to be the people who can understand what a trend is and prepare ourselves for that, not just a fad which will come and go. No sooner had the planking meme died off that a new one emerged. I think last year it was photo bombing was the big one. And when you try to take a photo and it doesn't work out as planned, it all began with this couple. They set up the auto timer and a squirrel jumped in the way right at the wrong moment, and they posted it online, and suddenly everyone started looking through their holiday photos for things they hadn't noticed before and thought, oh, that's pretty funny, and posted those. And so it just went global, took off very quickly. But no sooner had the photo bombing meme died off than a new one emerged. I think earlier this year, a weird one I saw was dogs that look like their owners, and that was strange. That only lasted a couple of days, and people thought, that's too weird, can we move on? And so we have. Just in the last month with the Ashes series, I saw more memes going around. We didn't do that well in the cricket, of course, and Shane Watson, didn't perform perhaps. Bit of squabbles in the locker rooms there. Disunity on the team, and so people started putting other memes around. But to me, it highlights the speed of the interaction that people have with these memes and the global nature of them. But also, I think it highlights that there are things that come and go, but there are things that are structural and ongoing. And what we're talking about in terms of the changes to families, these are massive, these are long-term, and these are here to stay. Diversity, growth, baby booms, changing household structures, and new ways of engaging with the technologically savvy and empowered generation of today. Let me move to the final area and my final slide. I think that to connect and communicate with 21st century families, we have to engage in relevant and effective ways. We can't communicate using 20th century approaches to this 21st century generation. It used to be when you're communicating with people, when you're getting your information out, or you're marketing your centre, or you're perhaps communicating with staff in a staff meeting, we used to focus on this cognitive pathway, communicating information and content, getting it across this x-axis. But if that's all we do, communicate rationally, statistically, evidentially, with data, we'll end up with agreeers who nod their head. They say, yep, I get it here. But we've also got to connect not just with the head, but also with the heart. And I think with the National Quality Framework that's evidence-based, that's what you're starting to see. The evidence is there, the data is there, the information is there. But the way it's communicated is not just rationally, but also visually. It's not just statistically, but it's also viscerally, so you can see it, and so you can feel it, and so you can observe it, and you can understand it at the heart and not just the head. Because that's this vertical axis, this relational, emotional, visual form of communication is what the 21st century is all about. That's what the internet is. It's not a rational communication tool, it's a relational tool, it's a social media tool, it's a video-based tool. It communicates, so you get it and you go, yeah, I'm excited about that, I understand that, I see it. The visual nature of it connects with the heart. Now, we've also got to connect with the head. If we just connect with the heart, we'll end up with seekers who say, hey, I like the brand, I like the people, I like the organisation. I'm not sure whether they've got the right solutions for me. It's a start to connect here, but we've also got to connect here. And so, in addition to seekers and agreeers, we've got here the embracers. They understand what you're saying and they resonate with how you say it. They're on your team and they're passionate about what they do, but they also deliver quality. They know what to do rationally and relationally they are on board. And these become the net promoters, these become the leaders, these become the raving fans, head and heart engaged and delivering real quality outcomes. In addition to agreeers and seekers and embracers, you've got there the hecklers. They don't get it, they push back, they question. Think about the heckler. When there are people pushing back on what you're doing or what you're saying, it's not just that they disagree with what you say, there's a relational disconnect with how you're saying it or with an experience that they've had. So we can't just solve it by going through the content one more time. We've got to solve it at the heart, not just at the head, because that's why they're so energized in their heckling. It's a relational disconnect, not just a rational one. I thought I'd finish with 4 final words. There used to be 3 R's in education, and 2 of them weren't even R's, so that never worked for me. Writing and arithmetic, come on. So I've got 4 R's, and they're all genuine and authentic R's to keep in mind with connecting and engaging with 21st century families, the families of the future. And the first is keep it real. I think we've got to be authentic in how we communicate. Openness, transparency is what the National Quality Framework is all about, and ensuring those standards are delivered and explained in real ways. I was yesterday in Adelaide, coming through Adelaide Airport, and I saw this sign in the bathroom. Adelaide Airport uses recycled water for toilet flushing, so don't drink. Okay, I won't drink it, I won't drink it. I think some of our signs get a little bit sort of mixed up when we're putting them together. Keep it real. Secondly, keep it relevant. How you communicate has to be relevant, has to connect in ways that make sense. That means that sometimes we've got to update our communications. Here's a sign I found that needs some updating. Well, it's a sign from America. When it first came out, if you see someone drowning, help, help, I'm drowning, help, help. You know, that's clearly a picture of someone drowning with their arms raised, right? But everyone under the age of about 40 sees that as if you see someone drowning, LOL, you know, laugh out loud. So perhaps is not as relevant as once that sign was. Thirdly, we've got to be responsive to the changes and the trends and the new families and the new cultures and the new parents and the new generation of children in your care as well. I found in this entrepreneurial world, people are always coming up with new solutions, and here is an invention for sometimes those fridge thieves that borrow other people's lunches. It's a Ziploc bag, a lunch bag, but they print paint on the outside of the bag. And so you can put your lunch in it, and so there your lunch is safe, but that's not safe. So just responsive solutions are very useful, aren't they? My final word and my final slide is keep it relational. We've got to be real, we've got to be relevant, we've got to be responsive, but relational always has been the heart to education, the heart to engagement and to teaching and to learning. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So that relational foundation has to be key to all that you do in your communication. We're in a social media world after all. Relationships is at the foundation of it all. I even found this photo. Be the first of your friends to like this post. Probably taking it a bit too far, a bit too literally, but nonetheless, we're in a relational world. Understand the trends, respond to the trends, and shape the trends, and you'll impact the families of today and tomorrow. All the best as you do it. Thanks for listening.